Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on a weapon that a lot of people have been asking me about, and that is the AN94. Why aren't more people using it? Why aren't more people showing off how good it is? The TTK is amazing, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of different people messaging me about the AN94. So I'm going to go ahead and clear up why it's not as good as you think it is and nobody's using it. If you do enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit that like button. If you're brand new, looking to find your way back for whatever reason, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Let's go ahead and get into kind of how this started. So pretty close to the integration, True Game Data was able to figure out that the damage drop-offs work a little bit different within Warzone than they do in multiplayer. And that actually did two different things. One is it kind of explained why some weapons outperformed others despite what the data was saying. And then it also allowed us to kind of reevaluate how we looked at weapons because the TTKs lined up a little bit differently. So if you go to True Game Data's chart, a lot of times what people will do is they either include bullet velocity or not. You got the open bolt delay, and then they focus on chest with 3 plates because that's how Warzone works. When you actually start looking at the charts, you have the fastest TTK, which is the AMAX. We know this. This is why it's part of the meta. Even if you go to extremities, it still performs very well, but there are scenarios where it might get beat out by another weapon just based off of that damage difference. So we'll go ahead and cross that one off. And then what ends up happening is you start looking at the rest of the weapons. We have the Kilo, the Grau, the AN, and the M13. If we look specifically at the AN, it's this green bar that goes all the way across here, goes up, has a little bit of damage drop off, so it's weaker than all these weapons because it has a damage drop off way earlier. But as soon as you get beyond this point, it pretty much has the lowest TTK out of the remaining rifles that were in the meta at this time. These are long range, low recoil rifles. That's sometimes why the AMX kind of gets taken out of that. The RAM performs very well at range based off TTK, but it's a lot harder to use based off the skill gap, ease of use, recoil pattern, all those variables. So what we're looking at here is the AN94 should perform very well at range. Taking on people 60 plus meters, you should be able to outgun the M13, the Grau, easily, right? Based off the damage, you should be able to compete with those numbers. That caused me to end up taking a manual approach to retesting the gun. And what I did is I pretty much went back in, manually tested. If you just spam the trigger, what that fire rate is, because a lot of times people will debate that if you just spam the trigger, you get a faster fire rate. We did the same thing with the actual, just hold the trigger, see what happens, looked at the individual delay between shots, added up all the various things, and we ended up with a set of results, which we'll go ahead and look at now. Basically going through with the timestamps, you can see the millisecond changes. You add up, you did the math, and that's pretty much how I got to figure out all this stuff manually to basically double check on the site to make sure everything is accurate. And that pretty much led to these individual results. If I just fired and looked at the rate of fire from when you fire the first bullet till the last bullet lands, you end up with a rate of fire of about 610, and that is factoring in the hyper burst that comes out. Those first 2 shots that come out in a very fast burst. And then that was overall 30 shots for 2.953 seconds. Overall, then when you just tap it, you just tap as fast as you can, you end up with a time of about 4 seconds. This lowers the rate of fire significantly. Even if those individual bursts are coming out pretty fast, the delay is negatively impacting that rate of fire significantly. And the delay on when I tested it was 1.33 when you're spamming it, but based off doing the math, it's probably closer to like 1.22. There's a little bit of frame rounding going on, and that's why the difference is here, because normally a frame's about 17 milliseconds, this is only about 11 milliseconds, so it's within the margin of error. The actual rate of fire of that 2 shots that come out is 1446, which was 83 milliseconds. Once those 2 shots are fired, the remaining 28 bullets in a 30 round mag, the rate of fire comes up to 592. You can see it's a little bit slower. This 1442 brings up the average by about 18 rounds per minute, which you might not think is a big deal. So once I did that part, I went to go double check True Game Data's site. So right here, you can see that the rate of fire is 680, which is about 100 RPM difference. So then that led me to, okay, which number is right? Let's go ahead and check a third-party source. I went to Exclusive Ace's video breaking down this weapon, and his numbers were very in line with mine. So I reached out to True Game Data, talked about it and said, hey, what's going on? Why is this number so high? And he kind of talked to me about the process and that they're averaging only about the first 8 or so shots. So it changes the RPM dramatically. And he gave me his individual numbers so we can do the math and kind of give a more realistic RPM and how that changes the TTK. So he gave me the actual numbers of pretty much where he got his stuff. And like we said, it's 680 on the site. And then he gave me how much it was between the first two shots and then how much it was between each additional shot after that. What you'll notice is right here, the average is 680-ish when you've only fired 8 shots, but that means that you will have 100% accuracy. You hit the first 2 shots with the hyperburst and the next 6 shots all land and hit the target. So we're not necessarily going to do that. If the TTK is 8, that means you have 100% accuracy. You don't miss any shots to the chest. If it's 11 at range, 9 at range, 10 at range, you are not going to hit 100% accuracy. I don't care who you are. You don't land 100% of the shots. And if you miss part of that first burst, essentially your rate of fire is 592 for the rest of it. No matter what, it's not going to get faster or slower within the remaining bullets. It's full auto at that point. So you have to factor the 592 into the equation, right? So if the hyperburst missed, which in his case, since he has a little bit more precision because he's doing it at 200 plus frames, he ended up with an RPM of 1800, which brought the average way high. Your TTK, even though it would be 650, you add in here, you end up with it just drops over time. The more bullets you fire, and it slowly creeps up to this 592. And there's not really a way in the site. It should be like, if you hit hyperburst, if you didn't, it's not really practical in terms of the site's usage. So what does this all mean? Let's go ahead and look at TTK comparison of how big a difference this is to the TTK if the hyperburst is not in there. So we're looking at here is the AN94 versus the AN94 versus the AN94. This one is just strictly chest shots. So that's only if you were 100% accurate to the chest, which we know isn't as practical. You need to land 8 shots to the chest. You end up with this TTK right here, this little orangish yellow line, which is incredibly fast. And that's what a lot of people are using. That's the first chart that we looked at. We're like, dang, this gun should be good. But then what I like to do with these types of weapons that have a little bit mixed damage, same thing with the AMAX, is you kind of average the limbs with the chest and it gives you a little bit different TTK. When you do that, you end up with this red line, which a little bit slower, but not like a horrible, right? It changes your perception maybe a little bit. But then when you subtract the hyperburst from the equation and you're not landing hyperburst and you keep the same average, look at the TTK now. It jumps all the way up to over 700 and it jumps over 900. And what does that mean? Let's go ahead and look at that. Once you've put that back in with the rest of the weapons, you end up with the AN94 looking a lot closer to this, where all these weapons that were essentially beat out by the AN94 are now slaughtering the AN94. I even threw in the MP7 average as a kind of a comparison here. And then now you can see that even if you use the Grau, you end up having a faster TTK than the AN94. All the way even out here, even though it's minuscule, it's pretty even at range, but the fire rate is a lot less, so it's unforgiving. If you're missing shots, the time between shots adds to that TTK. So that's why the Grau will generally perform better than the AN94. And that's why I'm glad I ended up going through all this, because it kind of gives us a better picture of where the AN94 actually sits and why in practical use, it's not nearly as good as the data would suggest based off the assumption that the hyperburst is getting landed. Because most of the time you're shooting at someone on a roof, you're going to shoot, first 2 bullets come out, they probably do not hit because especially the way they are, you go and track the target and then you hit all those shots, you end up with this TTK plus whatever that delay was to land the first shot. So overall, it is worse than it is in the site. So with that, I'm still going to go ahead and give you a class setup. I think the weapon can do well. It's just overall, if somebody's shooting at you, you're more than likely going to lose the gunfight because the gun just doesn't kill fast enough unless you just manage to land chest shots, headshots, get the hyperburst involved. Then it's decent, but besides that, it falls off pretty hard. So class setup, pretty straightforward, nothing new. This is definitely a long range option, so you're gonna want something that dominates up close because of how badly it performs up close. So we got monolithic suppressor, the longest barrel. You could obviously go with other stuff that maybe helps out with recoil or something like that, but generally, most people go with the monolithic suppressor because it gives you the range, bullet velocity, and suppression. It's kind of like the most broken attachment in modern warfare. But over that, you go with the longest barrel, commando foregrip. You could go tac laser because that would help you a little bit more with the aim down sight time. But overall, you go with the 60 round mag. You could go 45 round if you're in solos, duos, trios. Maybe get away with that. Quad, you definitely want to run the bigger mag. And then for the optic, most likely going to go with the VLK just because it helps with a little bit of stabilization. Or you can go with the holographic. But either way, the rate of fire for me is a little too slow. And since its practical rate of fire is closer to 600 than 680, it ends up being worse than the AMAX in pretty much every way. It's weaker in every scenario. The only difference is recoil is a little bit easier to manage. So I'll go ahead and leave you with that. If you did enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit that like button. If you're brand new, looking to find your way back, double check, make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.